The Nintendo Entertainment System.
So, here's something that I'm very late to the party with, a 3x3 grid. A while ago, this was a pretty popular trend on YouTube, and while I'm much too late for that here, I still want to make this video for myself and for the games that I love dearly and grew up with. I won't be reviewing these games here or even talking about them in depth necessarily. Instead, I just want to talk about my own personal encounters with these 9 games and what they've meant to me. So, without further ado, here we go. This is my 3x3 grid on the games that have defined my life. So, growing up, I was the youngest between me and my sister, and I remember her having a PlayStation 1. This was my first encounter with video games. I remember vividly watching her play, and she would never let me try. I watched her play many different games, and it always blew my mind. I just couldn't believe that I was actually watching what felt like a movie, but a movie that you could actually play. I couldn't grasp the concept of a video game. Eventually, I was actually given the console as a hand-me-down when she got a PlayStation 2, and this is where I actually got to play my first ever video game. The game that caught my attention first when I was watching my sister play. Crash Bandicoot. Yeah, unlike most people, I never actually played Mario or Sonic until much later in my life, and as a young kid, maybe 5 or 6, seeing this stupid little orange marsupial running around breaking boxes and having the silliest animations made me fall in love with this character. I played many games on that PlayStation 1, but the one that I always went back to was Crash Bandicoot, even after I got Crash 2 and 3. For some reason the original was always my favourite. Maybe it's the insane difficulty the game held, or the simpleness of its story and level design, but something about that first game just felt magical to me. I just loved the characters, the world, the music, and I loved the difficulty, as frustrating as it is sometimes, and oh my god, can Crash 1 be frustrating? But as the first game I remember ever witnessing, and the first that I remember ever actually playing myself, I'd say this was a pretty good one to start off with. And to this day, Crash Bandicoot remains one of my favourite series of all time. That stupid little silly orange marsupial is gonna stay with me for the rest of my life. So, a little later in my life, after running through some other games like the aforementioned Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, Oddworld Abe's Odyssey, Medieval, Wipeout, and a few others that I really shouldn't have been playing at my age, like Metal Gear Solid, Silent Hill, Resident Evil, or Twisted Metal, I eventually found myself playing a little game called Final Fantasy 8. Yeah, it was Final Fantasy 8. Yeah, not 7, the widely beloved one. I didn't actually play that one for another couple of years. No, my first foray into not just the world of Final Fantasy, but also RPGs, was Final Fantasy 8. I don't remember how exactly this game even came into my possession, to be honest, but I was about 9 or 10. I think a friend gave it to me to borrow and just never asked for it back. And if that's the case, then hey, fuck you, Ben, you'll never get this back. You will never get the... Anyway, by this point, the PlayStation 2 was already released, and of course my sister was using that while I had my trusty PlayStation 1. I think this is why I have such a love for the PlayStation 1 era. It's just so nostalgic to me because it was all I had for such a long time and I felt such a close connection to it. I was a generation behind everyone else. If Crash Bandicoot showed me what games are, then Final Fantasy showed me what games could be. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen in my short life. The FMVs were absolutely stunning. The world was so unique, and of course, I didn't even know what an RPG was, never mind a JRPG. I was blown away but very confused by this game, and I remember spending hours trying to figure out exactly how it even worked. Keep in mind, this is before I even properly knew or cared how to use the internet, and so I ended up spending what felt like weeks playing this game, trying to figure it all out completely by myself. This was genuinely one of the hardest games I ever played at that point. Of course, as an adult, I know how easy this game can be if you know what you're doing, but the thing is, if you don't know, Final Fantasy VIII is very odd and very unorthodox, for a number of reasons. The main one being that it is quite possibly the most backwards RPG ever made. You are actively punished for leveling up. Your magic is a finite number, and you have to draw it out of enemies very slowly. To say this game was difficult was an understatement, but you know what? I fucking loved it. The characters, the story from what I could even comprehend of it anyway, the music, and everything in between just made me love this game. And when new people come and play this game now, I can almost guarantee that they'll hate it. Its obtuse level design and outright bizarre mechanics are dumbfounding for most people. But for me, a kid playing this game, I had all the time in the world to figure it out, and beating this game for the first time felt like I was beating the unbeatable. And I will always cherish that memory. See, even though this game is the black sheep of the franchise, the one that everyone hates, I just love its surreal storyline. I love the angsty teenage characters, the strange enemies, the backwards gameplay, and the striking music. It also has what is quite possibly my favourite ending to a game of all time. I went on to play all of the other Final Fantasy games throughout my life, but this one was always the special one to me. Its sheer reality-bending story that I didn't even know games could have, and its difficulty, made it completely unforgettable for me. I think this and Crash Bandicoot is what affected my love for a certain other franchise later in my life, but we'll come back to that later. When I was around 10 years old, I had a friend that lived near me who had a chipped PlayStation 2. I'd go to his house all the time solely so that I could try this, since my sister would never let me play hers, but also to try the many hacked games that he had within it because it held pretty much the entire PlayStation 2's catalogue. One of those games, however, horrified me, and it gave me nightmares. I'd never seen anything like it, and the level of stomach-churning violence and the bleak tone that the game had just genuinely kept me awake at night. That game was Mortal Kombat Deception.
Scorpion wins. Fatality.
Not only was this my first fighting game, but it was also my first time ever seeing something that was so brutal and so horrific. As I mentioned earlier, I did play games like Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Parasite Eve, or Dino Crisis, all on my PlayStation 1, and while those games did scare me and they did keep me up at night as a kid, and my mum actually banned me from playing a couple of them for a while, none of them really got to me like Mortal Kombat did. It's really hard to say why, but if I had to guess, I think it's because of the much clearer graphical fidelity. The, at the time, realistic graphics and the characters paired with the incredibly foreboding and ominous tone that the game had just really fucking got to me. This was the first time that a game ever really got under my skin and scared me in a way that was much more real than just the tension from a survival horror game. I would go to my friend's house regularly and I'd play many games with him, but we'd always go back to Mortal Kombat, and every single time he will have found a new fatality or a new harakiri, and every time I would be really bothered by it. I remember specifically Melina scaring the hell out of me with her shark-like mouth, and her fatalities just really bothered me.
Melina wins. Fatality.
Eventually, when my sister gave me her PlayStation 2, I actually got the game myself after a few months, and I gradually grew to appreciate it more. I mean, it still scared the shit out of me, and weirdly I still get goosebumps if I try to play it today, but I learned of everything the game had to offer beyond just the simple fighting mechanics. You could actually play chess in this game, and a weird form of Dr. Robotnik's mean bean machine. There was also an entire bizarre, weirdly chill RPG in this game called Conquest Mode. Honestly, say what you want about the 3D era of Mortal Kombat, but Deception was packed with content. The MK series is still one that I love to this day, and I have picked up every single game day one since Mortal Kombat 9 back in 2011, which I actually got the collector's edition of. Many people have Street Fighter or Tekken or Smash or Soul Calibur as the fighting game that they grew up with, but for me, it was always Mortal Kombat. As I mentioned before, I played survival horror games on my PlayStation 1, which I absolutely should not have been doing at my age. And so, when I did get my sister's PlayStation 2, it was no surprise that I eventually found myself quickly playing Silent Hill 2 and Resident Evil 4. And honestly, picking between these two games to put on this grid was really difficult, but I eventually chose the latter, solely because I already made a video on Silent Hill 2.
Resident Evil 4.
Resident Evil 4 was, and still is, incredible for so many reasons. Not even starting with the game itself for me personally, because this was actually the first Steelbook I ever owned, which confused and amazed me, because I had never seen one of these before, which is pretty funny considering that nowadays I actually collect them. I'm not sure what there is even left to say about Resident Evil 4 that hasn't already been said. There's just so much to love here, but I think the main thing that blew me away personally was just simply the camera angle. I'd never really played a third-person game like this before, and simply having the camera right behind Leon's shoulder made it so much more immersive and panic-inducing, because of the simple fact that you could not see what was behind you, mixed with an amazingly tight and responsive yet tanky control scheme, made this game tense, even with its more action-orientated direction. That's not to say the horror was gone though, it definitely wasn't. The Ganados specifically have some horrific transformations that they go through, and the boss fights as well are incredibly memorable in how gross they are. This game felt like playing a big budget movie, and there was really nothing like it for me at that point. From the moment you get to that village in the beginning of the game and you survive the onslaught to Leon's amazing
Where's everyone going?
Bingo. It was hard not to get this unshakable feeling that you were playing something special and something that was defining a generation of not just action games, but all of gaming in general. This is also quite possibly the most quotable game of all time, with lines like
Los Illuminados. That's a mouthful.
¿Qué carajo estás haciendo aquí?
Your right hand comes off? No thanks, bro.
Between the so overly cool it's cheesy dialogue, the Spanish setting, the eerie but beautiful music, and the sickly yellow and green colour palette that the game has, combined with the fast-paced action, horrific imagery, and still to this day one of my favourite control schemes in a video game ever, Resident Evil 4 was, at that point, easily the best game that I had ever played, based solely on its sheer fun to play and the memories that I have of playing it over and over again during a summer holiday. Truly, this is one of the greatest games ever created. In June of 2010, for my 13th birthday, my parents for the first time ever bought me my own game console, the PlayStation 3. To say that I was ecstatic would be an understatement, and the first game that I ever got for it was Red Dead Redemption. Now, at this point, I actually didn't know this was made by Rockstar, nor did I know that Rockstar even made GTA. Of course, I was still young and very casual, so when I saw a fun-looking game about cowboys, which was one of my favourite subgenres as a kid, I thought it looked incredible. And it was. Red Dead Redemption was the first ever open-world game that I played that really felt like it. Now, that's something that's really hard to put into words, but when I played the GTA games like Vice City or San Andreas on my PS2, they didn't feel alive per se. Just like when I saw Mortal Kombat on the PlayStation 2, the sheer realism and scope of Red Dead Redemption on the PlayStation 3 blew me away with how real and alive it felt. And I was immediately sucked into this world and this surprisingly deep story about a man trying to redeem himself of his past sins. John Marston was a character that I grew to love, and his struggles across the dying West was as epic as it was tragic. And the way it all tied together with a story that had such a beautifully harrowing ending was incredible. It's an excellently written game in a world that I spent hours simply walking around and just existing in, exploring, and feeling a sense of wonder that I simply just don't for open world games anymore. And for that, I'll never forget it. For Christmas in 2010, I was given Call of Duty Black Ops. My first ever COD game, and goddamn, it was a really good one to start with. People always praise Modern Warfare 1 and 2 for their more grounded, more realistic storylines, and fast-paced, if not very unbalanced multiplayers, but for me, the more psychological, thriller, spy-esque storyline that Black Ops had was so much more captivating, all told in a quite literally scatterbrained way through various flashbacks in Vietnam and the Cold War. Straight away, the game differentiates itself from both past and future COD games by having the main menu of the game be from the perspective of the main character, who's strapped to a chair, surrounded by screens, being berated and asked questions by an off-screen interrogator. The vibe is so much more threatening and serious than other COD games, and I adore that. But the real reason this game is on here is for one of the modes in this game. Zombies. Zombies was the most addicting fucking thing that I have ever played in my life. A simple horde mode that was round based with a really fun objective to just survive as long as you can against the zombies. I really can't express in words how quickly I fell in love with this game mode and the sheer amount of hours that I put into it. The genuinely creepy atmosphere of Kino de Toten was enough for me to sink so much time into. Alone or with friends from school using online play, which was also a first for me. I played this game constantly, and when I wasn't playing it, I was watching YouTubers like the Pro Syndicate player, who essentially invented the training strategy that's so widely used today. Eventually though, as more zombie maps got added, I started to realise that there was actually a story being told here, and not only that, I started to question things. Like, for example, why is it that when the mystery box moves, it's a teddy bear that causes it? Why is it that there's a little girl maniacally laughing when that happens? Why is it that Kino de Toten starts with the teleport animation when you start the game? Why does this game, that is otherwise set in the Cold War, have a zombies level that takes place in Nazi Germany? I think, in hindsight, that little moment of wait was all I really needed to send me searching for answers. Because of this, I learned about Easter eggs in video games and how this mode's story was being told solely through them. I learned about how the story was linking into real-life conspiracy theories and occult events that supposedly happened in Germany during World War II, how it linked back to ideas like Argotha and the Tunguska event. It was a rabbit hole, and I felt like a conspiracy theorist going further and further down. My friends at school, however, didn't really care much for this, and so I ended up going online, and I connected with people, including my best friend, who I still talk with to this day. All of this concluded with the final zombie map in the game, taking place on the actual fucking moon, with one of the most satisfying payoffs to a storyline that I have ever seen to this very day. Learning about the real world history and the conspiracies, as well as meeting my best friend and going down a rabbit hole of late night chats going until upwards of 5 AM, theorising about the outcome of this insane storyline, would have never happened without this game, and I will always cherish those memories. When I got my PlayStation 4 in 2013, I actually remember being pretty underwhelmed by it, because there really wasn't too much to play. Eventually, I did get back into the console, leading to 2015, when I played something that just blew everything else out of the water: Bloodborne. It's already been well established in this grid that I love horror and I also love a challenge. Bloodborne smashes both of those things together to create a genuinely disturbing nightmare of a game that introduced me to the Soulsborne genre. Having never played the Dark Souls series in my life, I didn't even know what to expect when playing Bloodborne. I knew nothing about this game, and the sheer difficulty and the obtuse level design fascinated me as much as it did confuse me. I've always been the type of person where if I see a challenge or an obstacle that I can't seem to get across, I don't really get angry or mad. Instead, I like to question things, I like to rationalize things, and I like to think about how I can overcome that thing. I mentioned earlier that difficult games that I played early in my life probably had an effect on my love for some of the later games, and the Soulsborne series is definitely top of that list. I absolutely adore all of the Soulsborne games.
Except for maybe Dark Souls 2.
Bloodborne is the perfect game for someone like me. The challenge of this game, paired with the heavy inspiration of H.P. Lovecraft's style of horror, and a mysterious and dark storyline dealing with, you guessed it, blood, heavily intrigued me, and I was hooked on this game. I deep dive into the lore super hard. The grotesque eldritch creatures and the gothic world that this game had set a tone that I really don't think has ever been fully replicated in a game since. The eeriness that this game has is just so wonderfully disturbing and macabre, and after beating it, it led me to look for more difficult games, which then led me to the Dark Souls games, and that's a whole of the story. I have Bloodborne to thank for giving me a new appreciation for this subgenre of horror and this style of game. I actually beat Bloodborne multiple times, eventually leading to me actually getting the platinum for the game. A feat which I still brag about to this day because, fuck you, do you even know how fucking difficult it was? Do you even fucking know how difficult? Yakuza 0 is not a game that I should enjoy. When you try to describe the series, it sounds pretty bad. Which is why when I actually played it myself, starting with Yakuza 0, I actually didn't really like it. I thought that it was very restrictive, limiting, dull, slow, but eventually something just clicked with this game. There are so many things that makes this series unique in the gaming world. For lack of a better term, this is a game of clashes. Yakuza 0 is a JRPG, and yes, it is a JRPG. It was always one, even before the 7th game, shut up. But yet, it doesn't look, feel, or act like any other. The main story, while being grounded, tells a dark and somber gangster-style storyline, while also being surrounded by absurd Tekken-style beat-em-up gameplay. Characters can die or have serious heart-to-hearts in one scene, then you as the main character can go and play karaoke, play a dancing minigame, play in an arcade, or have phone sex, leading to some of the most bizarre tonal whiplash that I have ever seen in any forms of media.
もしもし。
極道の世界に KO はねえ。俺はな、キリ指の1本や2本なくそうが阿波野や渋沢に頭取られようがそんなことは構えしねえんだ。命ある限り何度でも這い上がってやる。だからよ、てめえみたいな半端もんが一番許せねえんだよ。死ねえボケ！
And I haven't even mentioned the side quests in this game. But you know what? It fucking works. I don't know how, I don't know why, but it just does. I can be doing the most goofiest stuff in a side mission, and yet the second that I go back to the main story, I am fully emotionally invested in this character's plight, in this serious gangster conspiracy style of story. After beating Zero, I played every single game in this franchise, and I can safely say that this is some of the most heartfelt, stupid, beautiful, and idiotic series that I have ever had the pleasure of playing. And the franchise's lovably stoic protagonist Kiryu is honestly hard not to root for, and the district of Kamurocho feels like a home to me after how many hours I've spent within it throughout the series. It is one of my favourite series in all of media, and you know what? After playing 8 games in a row, I still want more of it. And so here we are at the last game in this grid. And it just so happens to be my favourite game of all time. A game that honestly deserves its own video by me, and maybe one day it will get one when I'm brave enough to make it. It does, however, require some context before going into it. In 2017, I was in a very dark place in my life for many personal reasons that I can't, or rather won't, get into. Needless to say, some very, very bad things happened to me, and I was alone and teetering on the edge of doing something really stupid to myself, something that I wouldn't be able to come back from. One day, during that time of loneliness, and in the midst of this huge mental health crisis, I ordered a game. I honestly, genuinely, to this day, have no fucking idea what made me get this game. I had never even seen a trailer of it, but yet I bought it on the spot, on a complete whim, even though it didn't even seem like it would be my thing. It didn't even seem like something I would even like. Maybe it was just fate. That game was Persona 5. Persona 5 is my favourite game of all time because of the circumstances that I played it under. I can't really see anything ever replacing it in my whole life. Before this, it was Final Fantasy VIII, but this was just something so much more personal and different. It's just such a bizarre coincidence to me that this was the game that I chose completely on a whim, knowing nothing about it. An anime game. At the time, I hated anime. About a bunch of high schoolers? What the fuck was I even thinking? But whatever it was that made me get this game, when I played it, I don't know, man. Watching these characters grow, become friends with each other, and break out of their shells and fight against the darkest sides of the human heart, it really inspired me. And maybe that sounds cheesy, but it's true. It inspired me. Not just to get better within myself and have a change of heart, but to create, to explore the world, to pursue new forms of media that I grew to have a wider appreciation for, like anime, or visit new music genres. Persona 5's art style is wonderful, for lack of a better term. The word that I'd use to describe it would be loud. Everything in this game is loud. Loud and in your face, and its acid jazz infused soundtrack is so memorable and so catchy that I can't help but just randomly get some of these songs stuck in my head to this day. It's so unlike anything that I have ever played, by being half turn-based dungeon crawling JRPG and half high school life simulator, that it was hard not to be completely immersed in its world. It's a game that I can't help but smile whenever I think of, and it's affected me on so many different levels that I just simply don't have the time to get into. Persona 5 is my favourite game of all time, and it quite literally changed my life for the better, and that is why it has a spot on here. And that is all of them. Crash Bandicoot introduced me to the world of video games. Final Fantasy VIII showed me that games can have a deep storyline. Mortal Kombat Deception shocked me with how violent and scary games can be. Resident Evil 4 proved to me how games can be just as action-packed as blockbuster movies. Call of Duty Black Ops introduced me to the online game and world, and Easter eggs. Red Dead Redemption gave me an open world that truly felt alive, lived in, and it broke my heart with its storytelling. Bloodborne horrified and broke my spirit with its Lovecraftian horror and extreme but fair difficulty. Yakuza 0 made me both laugh and cry with its wonderfully absurd and brilliantly executed storytelling. Persona 5 gave me hope when I had none, and it made me wake up, and get out there. And that is my 3x3 on games that defined me as a person and made me who I am today. I will probably replay all 9 of these games until the day I die. When it comes to closing thoughts, in retrospect, reading everything that I've written and the 9 games that I've chosen, I think it's interesting how there seems to be a through line of 3 things: story, horror, and difficulty. And I find that pretty fascinating because I feel like I can now see where the roots of my love for these 3 things come from. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you got something out of this and enjoyed it. And until next time,